Good evening. That's it. I can go home. Okay. So, thank you so much. I know we have a lot of friendly faces here, like right here. A lot of friendly faces here, and I don't want to be too familiar. My name is Christy Bolingbroke. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Executive Artistic Director for the National Center for Choreography in Akron. Yes. If you wondered what NCCAkron stands for, that's what it stands for, National Center for Choreography in Akron. And I also don't want to presume that maybe you've even ever heard of NCCAkron, because you're here for the book, right? NCCAkron is one of 2 choreographic centers in the country, and it is focused on research and development opportunities to help create new work in dance, to strengthen the national ecosystem, and to advocate for dance and the creative process as an essential part of culture in this country. So why did we publish a book? Dance journalism is down. I mean, I don't have to tell some of y'all that. And how better could we advocate and start to tell our stories? And that's one of the reasons that we wanted to invest in telling these stories and getting them down on paper and being able to share them so they can become the textbooks of tomorrow and reference points, and making all of that a part of it. Now, when I say we, I'm not just speaking in the royal we. I am speaking for NCCAkron's board. I am speaking for NCCAkron's team of 6, 3 of whom are here on the ground tonight. Yes. I am speaking of Artists on Creative Administration's editor, Tanya Lockyer's behalf. And all of the 30 contributing authors whose voices and stories are in this book. And it is without further ado that I am so pleased to share tonight's program with you. We will run it at a quick clip. We will put it through together. If you are live streaming or choose to tag us, we would so appreciate that if tagging at NCCAkron, so we can also continue to repost and share. But we also have documentation happening this evening, because it will be published. Tonight's event will be published on our YouTube channel, as with all of our other Making Moves series. That's right, I'm tripping up a little bit because we don't do very many public-facing events. In fact, it is NCCAkron's 9th year, and this is our first event in New York City. So, thank you so much for helping us make history, for the work that you do year-round. If there's anything we've learned about the book, it's just because you aren't in the book, maybe your case study didn't meet our deadline. This has been 3+ years in the making. It doesn't mean that you aren't also doing creative administration every day. And we are so grateful, because we can't do this without each other to make it happen. Okay. I'll go officially off my notes. Please help me welcome, first up, to kick us off, our cultural strategist, Artists on Creative Administration editor, and contributing author, Tanya Lockyer from Suquamish, Washington.
Thank you, Christy. What a gorgeous room. Thank you so much for being here. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. All right. Well, as editor, I curated this book, but because it's also a collection of commissioned essays and interviews, I had the really deep pleasure of working with every one of these remarkable contributors as they developed their chapters. And creative administration, it's different for everyone, so we didn't want a single narrative. I really wanted this to be a textured conversation. And I describe in the introduction the 30 voices in this book this way. The authors work in rural and urban communities, within larger institutions, and as independent cultural producers. They are founders of not-for-profits, leaders of multi-million-dollar businesses, and collectives carving paths beyond nonprofit and corporate models. They collaborate with small, accessible venues, curated spaces, and Alaskan Airlines and Nike. They are new parents, and they are elders. They are immigrants and second-generation activists. And McKinney, who's one of the contributors, said to me the other day, it's really a collective of people risking for change. I love that. Yeah, we were writing for an academic press, but I assured everyone that didn't have to mean lectures from a podium, but here I am. But everyone in their own voice, but we would be specific. And so this book is full of details and really honest stories from 30 artist administrators, mostly many in mid-career, just figuring it out. So quick show of hands. Raise your hand if you identify as an artist. Okay, if you identify as an administrator, as both. Oh, I see lots of hands staying up. Okay, great. So this book is by and for people like you. It's full of stories and strategies about how art actually gets out in the world. But as I was working on it, I realized maybe one of its most radical propositions is actually to question those delineations: artist, administrator, creative process, administration, and to go, well, are there better ways? I write in the introduction, collectively and independently, artists have long created administrative structures and organizations to benefit themselves and inject creativity into their communities. To carve out a life in the arts requires a willingness to ask questions and find new ways, but this labor and expertise has often been undervalued and unacknowledged. Conversely, inside the offices of institutions, art workers often have arts backgrounds. Many try with varying success to maintain their artistic practices and ways of being within systems that often favor the expectations of donors and funders and governmental agencies, rather than those of the artists on whose work they rely. Artists are often administrators. Administrators are often artists. And I've come to learn that this really resonates with a lot of readers. I've had people reach out to me, moved artists because they don't feel as alone, but also administrators saying they feel like they've been denying a part of themselves. The executive director of the American Genre Film Archive reached out to me, said, I started to cry reading this book because I realized as a teenager I was told I had to choose between being a conductor or being an arts leader. And it's a false binary. And he said, by constricting myself, I've begun constricting the artists I work with. I am less open, I'm less flexible. He said this book is about how do we show up more completely as ourselves. It's about the creativity and administration, and the administration and creativity. So I just love hearing how this book resonates for people. But this book is also unique in that it's from the perspective of dance. So I had to ask myself, what does dance bring to a conversation about creative administration? And I'd like to actually start with how dancers think about space and spatial systems. Let's start with the circle. All over the world, cultures dance together in a circle. And my husband, he was invited to be part of this ceremony in the desert by a tribe who for millennia have gotten together, hundreds of people moving together in a big circle. And I want to invite you to close your eyes for a second and just imagine yourself in that circle. And what do you see? Now feel free to open your eyes. If you're like me, you find yourself looking into the circle, seeing your community. But my husband said they were looking outward. Hundreds of people moving together, looking out over the horizon. A change in space can radically change your point of view. And in my 30s, I began to look more outward. Before, I was sort of this inside-out artist. I became more like an outside-in artist. I collaborated with artists in other countries and other disciplines. And when you're creating something together in real time with a group of people, it's this very cool thing where people and ideas are connecting in so many different ways. And it's this dynamic system. It has many centers of power. Those centers of power keep shifting and changing. And it's kind of, to me, like the internet. And I think it's so interesting that in the 90s, when this other space started to take over our world, cyberspace, dancers, we were all taught initially to move from a single center. We started moving more like this, from a multiplicity of moving and sliding centers. And some of us also started to create these kind of collective performance events that had many centers. One I took part in happened near here, Lower East Side, right after 9/11. We took over City Block, and we decided we would do actions. They could be 30 seconds to a few minutes. And the idea wasn't to plop art into life. It was to create actions that would illuminate the everyday life around it. And I remember one evening, an elderly man, not knowing I was in the performance, he grabbed my elbow and he said, "The street is dreaming. The street is dreaming." And I realized the power of transformational dreaming public spaces. Which is all to say that when I was hired during the Great Recession to take on the leadership of a struggling arts organization that was in dire straits because it had lost its space, it was thrown into a 3-year emergency capital campaign, all I had to draw on was what I knew as an artist. The power of transformational space, spatial systems, collaboration, improvisation. My first week as the executive artistic director of Velocity, the consultant of the board said, "So would you like Velocity to die quickly or die slowly?" I knew we still needed a Velocity. And then I had this eureka. Velocity is not a building. Velocity is the people who activate it. And it's a system, it's a dance that lives way outside the boundaries of a building, out into our community, even into cyberspace. So I focused on how to create portals in to participate and collaborate. And we launched dance all over the city, like a confetti bomb. And within a year, the deficit was gone. We grew our audiences by 400% with a sold-out season. We grew our participation by 800%. Within a few years, Velocity became a national nexus. We drew artists to Seattle from around the country, and we helped launch more artists onto the national scene. And I say we, because we were a collective of artists doing this work, and Kate Wallach and Raja Feather Kelly were a part of that we. So I really experienced this as just an extension of my artistic practice. I realized not everybody else saw it that way, but I did. And I think part is because I focused on the choreography. Not just the choreography of how artists would move through our programs, but the choreography of how artists might move between our organization and other organizations. I had inherited this very linear ladder to a very narrow idea of success. But I knew as an artist what I wanted was a more iterative system of intersecting spirals and relationships so we could work better together, artists and presenters and producers, to create projects that had longevity, to build careers, build audiences, build support. And that's how we created a kind of a thriving dance scene. So, to end, I left Velocity about a year before COVID, and post-COVID, a journalist wrote a story with the headline, "What happened to Seattle's contemporary dance scene?" And there's something this journalist said that really informed how I approached this book. She said, "I don't get why the scene isn't thriving anymore. All the elements are still there. The schools, the studios, the artists, the donors, the theaters." And I realized we still have this habit of thought, which is that an arts ecosystem is a bunch of elements, and we should invest in those elements. I don't know if you've heard of this analogy, that you can have 11 players on a field with a ball, 11 players on another field with a ball. One's playing soccer, one's playing American football. What's the difference? It's the rules of engagement. It's the way things get set in motion. It's the choreography. So to end, I'm just going to read a little bit from the introduction. What does dance bring to a conversation about creative administration? Well, to start, dance artists have an embodied understanding of dynamic systems. The human body is a magnificent example of a dynamic system. Dances are dynamic systems, happening in the exchange between people, ideas, and perceptions, each new creative process and context generating new results. I think you'll find more than a few authors in this book have exceptional systems thinking skills. Many of the authors bring to creative administration a propensity for investigating underlying ideas and relationships versus just patching up problems without questioning the systems that give rise to them. In recent years, in part due to the work of Adrienne Marie Brown, the term emergent strategies has become popular in arts and social nonprofit circles. Dancers understand emergence in our bones, how simple actions can activate complex patterns of interconnection, how a small change in a system can create a chain of events with a larger impact down the line. So creative administration, it can be approached in a way similar to choreographing a dance, by looking beyond the individual elements to the flows of relationships between them. For example, if you want to foster a city's creative ecology, you might begin by first noting the elements present, artists, presenters, funding sources, but then imagining how artists at different stages in their lives might move through a choreography of these elements. Are there ways to optimize points of interconnection? What paths will foster artists' careers' longevity? Or as Katy Dammers eloquently says in her essay, how might the ecosystem move differently if it saw support structures as teams of intersecting relationships rather than artists forging through a competitive landscape alone? Well, putting together a book despite popular mythology. It is not a lone wolf enterprise. I'm trying to get choked up here to say that I was able to dedicate 3 years of my life to this project, and I've rarely had the kind of support to do that. I want to especially thank Christy and the University of Akron Press and NCCAkron Series and Dance for publishing a book like Artists and Creative Administration. We really need primary documents like this one, and I hope that I get to work on many more. Thank you.
Banning Bouldin, founder of New Dialect and contributing author from Nashville, Tennessee.
Hello.
I'm sure my adrenaline and the emotions will calm down,
You're doing great,
Yeah,
Christy.
but by the end of tonight, it'll be good. A little more context, if you're new to NCCAkron, this book, although not explicitly about our creative admin research program, has become an offshoot from our creative admin research program, which was based on the premise that there isn't one way of making dances, so there shouldn't be just one way of doing dance business. That best practices are best for whom, because that is a one-size-fits-all assumption. And so I think we've already heard a little bit of that in Tanya's beautiful opening. And I specifically wanted Tanya and Banning to talk a little bit about how writing an essay is different than making a dance. And particularly given our location in the Strand Book Store in New York City, what is it to write an essay about bringing dance in a community without New York City at the center? Who will be brave and go first?
I would love to go first. Hi, I'm Banning. I am a choreographer. I'm a part of one of the first cohorts of the CAR program, which has changed my life. Really honored to be here. I'm also the founding artistic director of New Dialect, which I have devoted myself to for the last really 15 years. In a lot of ways, New York is a big part of New Dialect's evolution. I'm from Nashville originally, but I moved to New York in the late 90s and spent a lot of time training here, seeing everything that I could. There was nothing in Nashville in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up there. My dreams of becoming a contemporary dancer could not be fulfilled there. And so I had to leave my hometown in order to get the education and the experience I needed to have the life that I wanted for myself. And New York really met that need in a massive way in the late 90s and the early aughts. I was really fortunate to go to Juilliard, and I got to work with some phenomenal choreographers in the early part of my career, and traveled quite a lot. And at a certain point, and this is really where, my story comes in, and my essay, the questions about why can't it exist in Nashville? Why can't there be an ecosystem that supports contemporary dance artists and their practice and their ability to come together, residencies where we can collaborate and, heaven forbid, make money, in the studio, creating and producing performances. And so for the last 15 years, that's the work that I've really devoted myself to in Nashville, is taking the creative skill sets and the sort of collaborative, co-generative, improvisational and choreographic skills that I honed and applying them to partnering with individuals, with entities to co-create the scaffolding to support contemporary dance practice in a place where it did not exist before. New York is absolutely a part of that story, but I feel really proud to be doing the work that I'm doing in Nashville.
Yeah, I mean, with all respect to NCCAkron's lead funder, the Mellon Foundation, that makes CAR possible, that made this book as part of our documentation budget possible. So all of the contributing authors were offered a stipend for this work, which we found out was an academic publishing disruption. But in the first year, when we reported, they said, okay, what are you learning? What and they named some beloved New York choreographers that I'll name now. What do the Kyle Abrahams and Camille Browns of the world need to know? And I was like, we learned that there are different opportunities outside of New York.
Yeah.
And so you need a different approach.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what you might want to add, Tanya, because you have a big, New York chapter as well. Did you take any special exercises to exorcise that from your writing?
I'll be honest. The first time I ever felt at home, I'm from the island of Newfoundland. So, and after I left that island, I felt never like I belonged anywhere until I arrived in New York. I felt at home here, and I would say in Seattle, people think of me as a New Yorker. But that said, I had a career that allowed me to travel so many different places, and there are talented people everywhere. Some of the most talented people I've met are in Yaroslavl, Russia. They could never get out. They're in Winnipeg, Manitoba. They're everywhere. And one of the reasons I took on the job at Velocity is because I was in the hallway. My essay starts this way, and there was a student, she was crying, and she said, I don't want to go to New York, but there's nothing here for me. And one of our students had moved to New York, and he had recently died of a diabetic seizure. He wasn't ready for New York. And I thought, I want my students to have options. Why is there nothing here for them? Or, Kate was my student at the time, can we at least let people get their sea legs before they go off to New York? So that really motivated me. And I also feel like I'm from the East Coast. We value history. Seattle doesn't value history. I wanted to write a little bit of Seattle history. It's always reinventing itself, right? And I thought, there's this amazing history of collectives. Before there's distributed leadership, there were collectives in Seattle creating organizations like On the Boards and the Seattle Festival of Dance Improvisation, which still exists, and it's mostly women, mostly queer people working collectively, like 6 artistic directors, and they pull it off. And I just wanted to tip my hat to that. So that's how I kind of feel about the Seattle part of that story. Was it hard? New York is a bit like a drug. At first you're like, okay, it's okay, I left the party. You kind of got to wean yourself off the cocaine of New York. But I do want to say about writing. Yeah. I've always loved writing. And maybe it's just this point in my life, but it's such a durational performance to have all this time and stretch it out and have layers. And I just love it. It's like curating an exhibition in a way or a season, but it's a book and there's time. And then it's so intimate. It's this collaboration. Everyone here who reads this book, you're intimately collaborating on what its meaning is. And I just love that.
Yeah. Did you want to say anything about writing?
Well, yes. Writing, I think, is a huge part of any mid-career artist who's trying to fund their work. It's a huge part of our day-to-day lives. We're writing grants all the time. We're writing applications. I can't even count how many artist statements I've written at this point in my life. But having the tremendous privilege and support to be able to go into my experience as a founder and community organizer and this very iterative process with you, Tanya, where, and feeling this like real-time collaboration, real-time feedback of how, I could tell the story, New Dialect's origin story through my lens and the sort of roadmap of how we did what everybody told us would be impossible. And to gain so much clarity through that process about what was, to feel a certain kind of closure also, and then a new kind of vision for the future. And absolutely writing the essay did that for me in a way that grant writing, artist statement writing didn't.
I think that resonated with some folks. I want to thank both of you for not only your contributions, and this is just to give you a taste because the Strand has also generously made books available. They're great gifts. It's never too early to start shopping for Christmas next year. And you can read this more fully as well. I will share that it has been amazing to get the feedback about the book, that when people are like, I saw something, or I'm teaching you, or I'm quoting something, and you're like, what did we do? And then I've also gotten some feedback. I'm a realistic optimist, I think, for those that know me well. And they're like, it's too positive. And I was like, oh. And they were like, I want to hear about the failures. I was like, oh, you don't get it. Like, we're all struggling. The curation of the essays was really an invitation for those that had been doing it enough and had the distance to be able to reflect and put it into words, which doesn't mean they're done, which doesn't mean they're the new, this is the next best practice.
No.
Yeah, what else have you learned since the book has come out? Specific to your essays, that's a loaded question.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of New Dialect's goals early on, and I felt so proud to really realize this as I was articulating through the writing process of like, wow, we have really helped to increase access to an art form and job opportunities for art. There are more projects happening in Nashville. There are more independent artists making work in Nashville than there were before we started. I feel intensely proud of that. And the resources available to support our work are totally unchanged. And so what do we do now? It's like there are more of us to support with what was already, you can imagine, it's Tennessee. Very limited resources for the arts. And so new challenges, new administrative experiments around like, well, how do we address what could be conceived as like a competitive scenario for the same resources to like looking at cooperative models, working collectively to share resources. I have access to space, you have access to So these are things that I feel like the challenges of what's ahead became clear through the essay writing process, and then the potential for new administrative experiments to go after solving them also became clear.
Excellent. I'm going to move us along because we're going to hear more specifically about Seattle. How about a round of applause for Banning? And next up, I'd like to welcome founder of Dance Church and contributing author Kate Wallach, who splits her working home environment currently between California and Michigan.
So I get to interview Kate. I just want to say, I think one of the biggest challenges for everyone writing these essays was getting out of grant speak. Not everybody had that. You did not have that problem, Kate. And I've known Kate for a long time. So you were my student at classes at Cornish. And then when I was going to take on Velocity, you're like, do it. And then you were a thought partner for a lot of that. And at the beginning of Dance Church, I was there for all the beginning of that. So I don't know what else you want to say about contextualizing our relationship, but it's been 15 years.
Yeah, you were the one that was basically like, you need to teach yourself how to teach. And like the seed of Dance Church in a lot of ways like goes back to you and our relationship. So thank you.
Okay, so it's a love fest up here, so you know. But Kate wrote this wonderful essay, Dance Church, How I Built This. I don't know if you know what Dance Church is, but if you read her essay, it goes from, it's a free Sunday class by donation to I got $4 million in seed money and turned this around during COVID really quickly. I think you said you got 14,000 people on your mailing list, like in one weekend.
40.
Okay.
40,000.
Yeah, and you were able to respond. I've just known you for so long. Your resilience, your openness. It's interesting for people to say the book is too positive. No, it's called How Are You Resilient When You're Constantly Facing Adversity, right? And so I am curious to hear you update us, because at the end of this essay, it's called The Separation of Church and Kate. And you get a CEO. Everyone tells you get a CEO, and you're like, this is great. I have a CEO now, but there's an update. And I'm wondering if you can update us on what's changed in Dance Church and how that's connected to resilience.
Well, maybe just to give a little pre-context to that, I think one of the reasons why I maybe didn't have to get out of grant writing speak is because I actually haven't relied very heavily on grants and haven't really written a lot of grants. But I write a lot of decks and other things. Also, I just want to say that I haven't slept in 2 days because I do spend a lot of time in Los Angeles, and so I've spent putting a lot of energy there. So if I'm swirly, I just want to say that. But yeah, my essay, How I Built This, which I don't know if anyone is familiar with that podcast. I've listened to the Zumba one, the Soul Cycle one, all of them. And I don't have my own yet, so I put that as the title for in our book. But I basically case study my career and how I essentially started the Seed of Dance Church, which wasn't about dance church. It was about making dances and having a dance company and being able to pay my studio rent that Tani gave me the keys to in Seattle to be able to like pay dancers and make dances essentially. But the thing that happened was I started like funding dances through building a community rather than funding dances by getting grant money. Obviously, there was some grant money there. There also was, commission fees and presenting fees, and it all sort of blossomed at once. But there became a moment where everything was sort of one, and then I had to make some business decisions. And that was the first major one, separation of church and Kate, which is when Dance Church sort of was completely separate from the nonprofit entity that I had formed and founded. Right when that happened, COVID happened, Dance Church sort of exploded on the internet, but prior to that, Dance Church had already, been flourishing in a lot of ways and expanding unintentionally. And in that moment, I saw an opportunity for Dance Church to be able to receive funding that was major venture capital funding, and went in a completely unknown direction that I felt like I was sort of forging new territory that I had no one to really look to or look up to that had done that before. One of the things that came along with that was, you're not a CEO, so you need a CEO. And so I think that in terms of resilience, the one thing that has always been leading and guiding me through life has been my morals and my values and wanting to make dances and wanting to get dance to people. And the thing that I think is rare in business is that most founders identify as founders and they have plan Bs. Dancers don't have plan Bs. This is our life. We can call them administrative experiments, which I love, but it's actually just living our lives and trying to figure it all out. So, yeah, I'm the CEO of Dance Church now, again, and I think that the update on Dance Church, I actually reflected and looked at our essay, and we now have almost 50 Dance Church teachers teaching classes in cities around the country. We have a staff of 4 people. But we have a lot of collaborators. We work with agencies. We have a really amazing board. We have a lot of incredible investors and advisors helping us. And Dance Church we just launched a new strategic plan for the next 5 years. And we are bringing dance to the people.
So a really new model, right? I mean, brave new ways. Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about who your models are too? Because I think in the past, models are Martha Graham, we get a company, blah, blah, blah. Who are your models? I know you've shared with me one of your role models.
Yeah, I think I've always looked to people like Virgil Abloh has always been a model for me. Like, this man had his own, he's a designer, then he had his own fashion line, but then all of a sudden you're like, oh, but now he's the artistic director of Louis Vuitton. Like, how do you juggle all of that? Same thing with people like Pharrell. And so I've always looked to people like that. Like, I'm like, I need to be dancing and I want to be making dances. And but I also have this giant baby that is basically bigger than any dance company I could have ever imagined having, called Dance Church. And so when I realized that it was about being able to scale yourself and scale your ideas and being able to have a team that you trust and like share ownership with people and let other people do the thing, that moment of like separating myself from the things that I'm creating, like the things that I'm birthing into the world, like that was the moment when I was able to, you know, let Dance Church expand and grow Dance Church and have other people, have 50 incredible teachers that teach better classes than I can teach myself now. That was the moment when I was able to sort of see the pie chart of doing a multitude of things.
Beautiful. Understand. I know you've said to me you think of Dance Church as the biggest dance you've made. And you know, the people in those classes are the participants, and they are the performers, and they're everything, aren't they? That's beautiful. Well, I was handed this because we're going to have to shift, but I could talk to you forever.
No.
Well, we'll have to write the book or the podcast. Yeah. How about that? So now I have the honor of introducing some more people up to the stage. So first, the Deputy Director and the Chief Curator of Performing Arts at REDCAT LA, also in Los Angeles. Our hearts are with you today, Katy Dammers, who will be joined by the founder of Dell Arts Consulting, Delphine Lai, and also joined with them an interdisciplinary artist I've long admired, who's also the founder of a collaborative group called Canary Torsi, Yanira Castro. And we'll go back to the stage, founding executive artistic director of NCCAkron, Christy Bolingbroke. Thank you, everybody.
Hi. I just want to give a big shout out to Christy and to Tanya. This is an incredible project, and I think this is also an incredible evening that shows you the wide diversity of practices and writers and thinking styles that go into the book. So I really do encourage you to buy it and to read it if you haven't yet. For our 15-minute segment, I want to quickly start with the selection from the chapter that I wrote, which was very specifically about relationships, which is much of what we're going to talk about today, and collaboration. But for me, very much to talk about the somewhat unsung, but I think through this work that we're doing, it's more and more recognized, which is important, the work of creative manager and producers. And many people use a variety of different words: creative producer, curator, dramaturg. There are so many labels that we could put to it. And often I think a really good creative producer or manager embodies all of those labels simultaneously. But I'm going to read just a little chapter, or a little paragraph from my chapter to get us started, and then I'll bring some questions to these folks. But my chapter kind of starts to go through my relationship, in particular with Wishon Mitchell and Silas Reiner, two incredible choreographers who work together as a collaborative team, who I worked with for nearly a decade and who were part of the CAR program. So I say, in the last 20 years, initiatives like Creative Capital and LMCC's Extended Life Development Program have supported artists with professional development opportunities in classes like accounting, grant writing, marketing, and new work development. Harnessing the neoliberal rise of the individual, these programs sought to bolster artists by giving them tools to navigate a field marked by scarcity and competition. These programs, much like NCCAkron's CAR program, place emphasis primarily on the artist rather than the complex ecology of the field. This is not to say that artists are not creative administrators or that they shouldn't have access to these tools. They absolutely should. The idea, though, that artists are the only people who should receive access to these supports, I think, is short-sighted. If organizations truly want, and here I'm quoting NCCAkron, to think beyond the boundaries of the known traditional models and best practices, as NCCAkron says that they do, then they need to acknowledge the critical roles that managers/producers play in creating new work and provide resources specifically for them. Which I have to say, in supporting my writing of this chapter, I think they're already doing that. So I'm really grateful for that, and I think a lot of what the four of us will talk about now is about how artists are experts, and I think an important part of redesigning systems change. So Yanira, I kind of want to go to you next. Your essay interviews Maura Cuffey-Peterson on the progress of developing and ultimately participating in a think tank for the Creative Rebuild New York program, which many of you may remember as something that happened in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis. So I want to ask you, what new questions, how did that work, which framed the artist as an expert in collaboratively crafting new systems of support? How did that impact your own practice as an artist?
I think at the heart of that essay is this question of accountability. So artists and arts administrators are brought into this think tank not to give feedback or to give advice, but to actually create the programs with the staff. And that's a pretty radical proposition. And they did that through a period of 3 months. But what that meant is that as artists and arts administrators inside of that think tank, we were accountable. What we were deciding was going to impact our friends. And for the first time, I had tremendous not for the first time. I had a newfound respect for the decisions that funders have to make. In particular, there was this one moment where they asked us to sit and weigh how gender and race was going to be weighted in the guaranteed income program. I was almost in tears once I recognized like what that meant, how that might impact individuals. So how that came into my own artwork is this question of accountability, right? So I had always thought of myself as someone that works very collaboratively, very collectively, and then suddenly I was like, oh no, all of our budgets are gonna be on Google Sheets and everyone can see what everybody's doing financially. So that was a big sort of shift that I made at that time, which of course then brought up all kinds of questions. And so then we had to learn how to facilitate those conversations with care and then to be able to shift and make other kinds of decisions. So that's, you know, an example of like how that kind of work, like how that piece of accountability really made me look at my own collective participatory work inside the administration of my own work.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that program, talk about kind of like the next step of what's come out of this book, is something that continues to be a real model within the field of how to do things differently and how to engage artists in the systems creation from the get-go. So I want to turn to Delphine and Christy, who co-wrote an essay together that focused on unlearning and asking questions anew. So not asking the same things again and again. So I want to ask you both, you know, what new questions did you find yourselves asking as you crafted the piece together? Has anything changed in your working process since then?
I can start. This is all co-authorship, figuring out who speaks first even. So Christy and I have a long period of working together. I checked just this afternoon to our first emails. I was wondering, how long have we been working together? And I looked at our first writing piece we did back in 2014. So we have like over a decade of time working and writing together. And I think approaching this essay of co-authorship, it really made us question what can we leverage from our experience of working together, what can we build on, and then what are the practices that we have that will be ones that we need to let go of in order to have a co-authoring relationship. So those were, I think, the main things that came up first.
Definitely, and I so appreciated, and this was a conscious choreography where I sit and when I talk. Thank you, Katy, for facilitating. I appreciate the introduction of accountability as well, Yanira, because I always attribute to Del when I'm speaking with CAR artists. That is one of the first lessons that I learned in our own letter of agreement. NCCAkron is one of Del Arts Consulting's clients. And in the letter of agreement, there is a line, I always paraphrase it, basically like, Del can't do her job unless we do our job. And that's such a small piece.
But a very important piece that I put in contracts.
Yes. and it's something that I've seen so many artists who are trying to hire their first managing director, their first executive director, their first, creative. Titles are cheap in our field, right? You can call it whatever you want, but are you really ready to be accountable to this person? Because hiring them is not just a means of handing over your to-do list.
If you want me to be successful, you need to be responsible for that as well.
And so the biggest shift was now we're co-authoring, and it's like, well, who's generating the content if I'm not the client anymore? And so we did spend a lot of just extra time together talking, and then would be able to lean on like, okay, I know how we would do this if we were working on a grant report together, but what's the next steps now? And as opposed to assuming it was going to be the same way we would always, follow up in between meetings.
I will say that having worked on so many grants and reports and ongoing different writing pieces with NCCAkron, with ODC, I feel like there was so much trust that we had built between each other that was so helpful in this process, that even just saying in Slack, like, tag you're it, like, because we understand how we work together, and that when someone tags you, you own that, and you can do whatever you want with that piece of writing, and I trust you, and you tag me. There's so much trust involved with that, because nothing that we write is precious, and I feel like we both feel that way, and having that known is really helpful, that, you know what, you didn't do it wrong, we just needed to go through that piece of writing before we got to the next thing, and that's part of our process of working together, and then just redefining, well, then who's coming up with the ideas this time? And that was new to us in this relationship.
So one thing I talk about in my chapter is a lot about orientation within a relationship. So I talk about with Rashawn and Silas, the two of them are orienting, and then with me as well, it was like a queer triangle. Who's getting thrown in front, who's in back, how are we alongside? And I felt that too at the beginning of your essay, Christy and Delphine, where you talk about a Deborah Hay piece where she says, turn your fucking head. Like, I'm not gonna tell you where the front is, you need to reorient your body. So I wanna open up a more organic conversation now to think about relationships and orientation. What did you learn from writing these pieces about your orientation within the field and how you might wanna reorient that ecology? Yanira, do you wanna start?
Well, the impetus of writing that essay, when Christy and Tanya approached me, was, I had just spent 3 months with Maura Coffey, like, in this, incredible experience, and I had never had anything like that, being a part of the think tank where I was so, again, accountable and responsible, that I wanted to be able to communicate that out as a real process, not just for the creation of a guaranteed income program or funding programs, but for everything, like festivals, programming, running artist centers. Like, what does it mean to really create think tanks that are not feedback groups, but are really developing alongside a staff what these programs actions are, and creating a real ecosystem between artists, programmers, funders that are in conversation about the worlds we are actively building together, just seemed to me like a really ripe opportunity that I wasn't really seeing elsewhere. I was seeing artists run places, or I was seeing places that were run by administrators or artist-administrator relationships, but I wasn't seeing something where all of us were actively building something together and saying, what about this experiment?
And I'll also say, Yanira, just to shout out your incredible work in the field beyond this program, is Yanira was also part of Creating New Futures, which many of you may remember was a really important part of our movement as a field together in the 2020 period, and I think beyond, in helping us to reorient and to look at things differently and to ask for accountability in shared space. So just want to say thanks again for doing that incredible work that I think is another document a lot of us continue to reference and go back to.
Yeah.
But Christy and Delphine, I'll throw it to you.
I mean, what I'm most excited about on the other side of that is, you may disagree.
Maybe I will.
Okay.
I don't know what you're going to say.
Is that you came back around and you were like, what else can I do? Like, once you sort of flex these muscles, and what I hope comes out today is that none of us are any just one role in this field, and if you were to think about it as sort of creative cross-training, and to see you, after we've worked together for a decade, be like, well, what else could I do other than writing? And Del is actually managing one of our admin experiment cohorts and working very closely with 5 groups of artists. And that's been just amazingly exciting in the last 3 months to develop.
And I would add on to that, co-authoring this essay, as well as reading your essay, Katy. I quote it all the time. There's one, I think in one of your interviews, it said, I inherited the practice of being unseen. And I think by co-authoring this essay, as well as reading that and reading all the other ideas that you had in that essay, has really shifted how I visualize my own work. And writing this essay, visualizing my voice, has really changed, made me question how I practice. And so yes, doing the admin experiment has been wonderful, and being able to have that confidence to say, you know, Christy, I also want to lead a book club for NCCAkron, so I'm doing that now as well. And translating that work into my work with the other artists and arts organizations that I work with, kind of questioning, okay, this is how we've always been doing things. What else could we be doing differently? What else could you be doing differently? And I find that having that essay that you wrote, Katy, and then doing the co-authoring has really given me that shift over the past 3 years, because it's been 3 years since we wrote that essay.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And in that same spirit, I also want to shout out that yes, I wrote this essay, it was great, but it was really important to me when I wrote it to also bring in a lot of other folks into the field. So I want to note that it does include segments from long-form interviews that I did with a variety of other manager-producers, which include Nora Alami, Chelsea Goding-Doty, Erin Maddox, Mariah Weathers, and Miranda Wright, all of people who are incredible artists and have moved into administrative roles. And I will say too, because it's been a 3-year journey, a lot of things have changed actually since I wrote this essay. You know, I'm now working at REDCAT. That's a big shift. For the first time in my life, I only have one job, which I think says a lot about this field. And I will say for each of the incredible people I named, they are all in different jobs too. So I want to close by saying that, you know, each of these essays within the book has a beautiful creative administration experiment / prompt. This is an academic press book. We hope that people will assign it. We hope that you'll return to it. And this was a great idea that Tanya, as the editor, came up with, of really encouraging people to take it and then bring those lessons into their own life. And so I just want to encourage you to do that and to maybe think about, you know, one of the things in my kind of prompt for people at the conclusion is to really take a look at an artist that you care about and to think about who's accompanying that artist, whether they're in the credits or not, and how can you trace that trajectory. And I think even amongst those who are sitting here, you're seeing the relationship between Tanya and someone like Kate, between Christy and Delphine. These are long-term things. So I just want to encourage you to really foster those relationships, because as Tanya noted, that is ultimately the ecosystem. It's not the elements of the grantor and the finances and the coffee shop and all of that. It's really us here today. So with that, I'm going to close out our beautiful little section, and I'm going to welcome to the stage Raja Feather Kelly, Artistic Director of the Feather Theory and a contributing author. Raja's based here in New York and will read a segment. Thank you, everybody.
I want it to sound like I'm on NPR. So, hi everybody, this is how I really sound. I know I'm supposed to read a segment, but I'm gonna do what I want, because Time is what it is. So I'll let you know, I'm gonna do 3 things. One is I'm gonna bring my practice into the room, and the second thing is we'll talk about what's in this book, and then the third thing I'm gonna do is tell you what I've been thinking about while I have also been listening quite deeply to what everyone has been saying. So I work in popular culture and theater, and so I wanna bring some pop culture into the room. And it's all related. So I'll bring a quote, and this quote is from, what's Lady Gaga's real name? Stephanie Giamatti. Okay, this is a quote from Stephanie Giamatti. It's kind of a joke because when she was campaigning for A Star Is Born, she kept saying the same thing in interviews, and I was a part of the camp of people who made fun of her until she got me, and I was like, oh, I get it, and she really means it, and it's a real thing. So she kept saying this quote that was like, there can be 100 people in the room. She was talking about Bradley Cooper. She's like, there could be 100 people in the room, and there's just, if one person believes you, it'll just like change your whole world. And she just kept saying it, interview after interview, and I was like, Stephanie, we get it. You're in love with Bradley effing Cooper. And then it started to hit me when I think about my career. I was like, wait, my career is exactly the same. And as I like look around this room, and often dance events or just like reunions, I'm like, oh, I can go back to the very first solo that I ever made, and that was curated by Velocity in 2013. And I was like, I don't really know what I'm gonna do, but I really wanna make a solo. I also hate performing solo, but they curated it, and that started this career for me in a way. And then in 2015, I met you, Christy, and that gentlefolk over there, Tim, at CRC, and I was like, we gotta figure something out, because dance ain't working, and y'all believed in it, and we have come back together in so many ways. And then in 2018, this lovely woman over here, Melanie George, I was like, people don't fucking understand how to talk about my work. And she took it on, and then wrote this incredible essay that is still used today that gave people language to talk about my work. Shoot back then to 2019, where we started the sort of beta of creative administration, and I was like, I need to start a board, but I can't do what everybody's doing, because I moved to New York City in 2009, and my class, all of the people who moved to New York and started companies when I did, are gone, and I'm trying not to do that. And you're like, let's figure it out. So we got our French fries, we got our rosé, we got our oysters, and then I feel like, in my mind, I'm like, this came from that, right? But then we went back to that guy, and we were like, you've got to start the board, because Raja doesn't want a regular board, and you've got to figure that out. And then he was like, okay, and then he did, and I have this amazing board. And then this gentleman today, I did not meet this gentleman before today. It's 2025, and this gentleman's like, I know who you are, and I know what you do, and I'm like, what the fuck? And then, people say that, because that's what they do at dance, but then I like took a picture, and then I came back, and then he talked me through most all of my work, and I was like, oh, he wasn't kidding. He literally knows what my work is. So I quote Stephanie Giamatti, Lady Gaga, there could be 100 people in a room. We have 100 chairs here, because that's how many that Dante set out. And just one person can believe in you, it can change your whole world. And I've got like 10. And so I feel so grateful in this moment that I've had people literally handhold my career to where it is. And so I'm so grateful for that. My time is up, right? Okay. So so I'm gonna need your help, right? When I was asked to do this, I was like, I'm about to have a baby, I can't. And then I was like, but I've got to, because it just doesn't get written down. Things don't get written down, and so it was important to me. And I also felt that people wouldn't understand the totality of what an artist is and how many things that we do. And so I was like, I need to be manic, because I'm manic. And I need to be manic and show that I'm manic, because I need people to understand just how much an artist does in one day to just get something done. And so I wrote what feels to me like 30 titles of essays that should be in the one essay that I could have written. So I'm just gonna tell you the titles, and if you're like, read that paragraph, then I'll read it. And if not, you'll just hear all the titles, and that's totally fine. So there's gonna be one person in the room who's gonna make this happen. So, just if you're like, stop there, then I'll read it. Otherwise, again, I'm just reading the titles. The Story About How Dreaming is Impossible, Title 1. Title 2, Why Do We Dream for What Many Would Say Are the Foundations of Art Making? Title 3, 10 Things I Dared Myself to Say Out Loud. Okay, that's it. So now we don't get to hear any of the others, that's it. You gotta buy the book. Thank you, what's your name? Wait, I know you. Okay, sorry. I know. I'm like, I should probably look at everyone like, oh, I know you. Oh, I know you. Anyway, so 10 things I dared myself to say out loud. Artists always say time, space, and resources when asked what they want because that is exactly what they want and need. It's that simple. 2, I bet you, an artist wouldn't say this out loud, but when we're asked, what are the desired outcomes of your proposed residency, grant, project, or proposal, 99% of the time, we lie with our answers. We don't know, we're artists. Number 3, I truly believe there is no such thing as a target audience because if artists could really choose who or what or where we wanted to present our work, we'd either already have the money or not need it. Number 4, the first sentences in each of the questions you respond to on your grant applications are the only sentences that matter. Number 5, in America, artists have to ask for permission to be artists. Number 6, more than 60% of grants are lottery, even though applicants are led to believe they are not. Number 7, getting an award is like a currency. It's like a VIP pass, I swear. There's a note on that, but I'm not going to the note. Number 8, you are only as good as how many tickets you can sell. Number 9, if you don't take the high-profile, low-budget, less-than-average, mediocre, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that comes once in a year, someone else will. Number 10, every artistic opportunity is a one-night stand. Now, what's interesting to me about this essay is the person who is like, it's all positive. I don't think I said a nice thing in any of my essays. And in fact, I felt really bad about it. I was like, I don't want to seem grim, but I really want people to kind of understand what it's like to be an artist and what we're going through. So to that person who didn't get to page 155, let's just send them a PDF. So to end, to close, to leave you, I have just been sitting over here and I'm like, why are all these people here? Like, what do they want? What are they here for? I don't know, but I've been trying to figure out what to say to you, like what to leave you with, what would be important, informative, that kind of could wrap this up in a way. And I haven't totally figured it out, but I told myself maybe stop thinking. And then I was like, oh, stop thinking, interesting. Can you do that, Raja? No, took a deep breath. And then I listened. And then I started thinking about what an artist is. And I was like, they need to make they need to make, and I was like, maybe you should ask for funding. Maybe some of the audience is gonna only be funded. And then I was like, don't do that. But also, but in a moment, I had one moment where I took a breath and I thought about a lesson that I learned from Thich Nhat Hanh. You all know this guy, right? Great, genius. And he once said in a Dharma talk, that a flower is made of non-flower elements. And I'm always thinking about this. A flower is made of non-flower elements. A flower is made of non-flower elements. I'm like, right, a flower isn't like made of flowers. And when I think about making dances, I think about that. Like I'm not taking dances to make dances, right? A dance is made of non-dance elements. An artist is made of non-artist elements, and a community is made of non-community elements. So I just want you to think about that. I want to think about who you are as a person and as an artist. I'm assuming that in some way all of you are an artist. I want you to think about the things that you make and produce. And I want you to think about the communities. I think now more than ever, and I hate the trope now more than ever, but it's again and again that now and tomorrow and the day after that, forever and ever, we will need community. I swear. I look out, I see my community. I'm so honored. I'm so grateful. Thank you. And you are made of non-community elements. You are not a chair. You are not a podium. You are not a light switch, but in some ways you are. You are that bolster, you are that light, you are that thing. So be that for someone else, yes? Can we just like say those three things together? A dance is made of non-dance elements, a community is made of a, we're gonna do artist, dance, community, yes? An artist is made of non-artist elements. A dance is made of non-dance elements. A community is made of non-community elements. Thank you.
Only a fool would follow Raja Feather Kelly. That's all, folks. I am just here to once again extend my gratitude to all of the contributing authors and especially our brave speakers this evening. Round of applause. to Walker and the amazing team at the Strand when a National Center for Choreography comes to them and says, we want to do an event in your space. Thank you for having us, and thank you for taking such great care. I also want to acknowledge the University of Akron Press. We pushed their limits, y'all, and they learned a lot too. And it wouldn't have happened without them, and we all need distribution channels. They are a part of our arts ecology now. And then especially also want to give a shout out to Dante, Christy, Nikisha, Chrissy, and Mary Claire, and all of our contributing authors again, as well as the NCCAkron team for making all of us look good. Thank you for your care and attention too. All right, non-community elements. We have the space until 7:30. There are snacks out for survivalist purposes. If you need to grab and go because you have a show tonight and tickets, it's going to be a long weekend among the APAP and Jan Artsness. But also make sure that you make new friends before you leave tonight. And there are some books available for sale too. Limited supply, so don't go home empty-handed.